My brother-in-law had a company that made commercials, video production. I went over to his studio, I put on a freaking tie, and I did a YouTube video, basically. I was like, hey, I'm Alex, and I'm a programmer. I made this video game, and I'm going to blah, 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 blah. I'm looking to raise some money and I gave it to my dad and said, hey, show this to all your friends. And I think I raised probably $10K.
Wow.
Enough to do one printing run of cardboard boxes. And then I wrote a program that would automatically take a load diskettes into the computer, and copy them. And we shrink wrap stuff in my basement. And it was totally bootstrapped.
Welcome to the Gaming Founders Podcast, a show where we interview the founders that have shaped the gaming industry. I'm Eden Chen, the CEO of Pragma, a back-end game engine founded by engineering leaders that built the platforms for some of the largest live service games, like League of Legends, Fortnite, Destiny 2, and Plants vs. Zombies 2. Pragma powers services like accounts, matchmaking, and player data for the world's most ambitious live service games.
And I'm Kevin Zhang, partner at Upfront Ventures. We're a venture capital firm based in LA and San Francisco. I lead game investments both in studios as well as the pick and shovel tools that power game developers and content creators to do their best work, including Pragma. We interview founders on their origin stories, the tactics that help them survive and thrive, and key lessons for anyone interested in building the next generation of leading gaming companies. Learn more and subscribe today at pragma.gg/gamingfounders. Welcome, listeners. Today's episode is with Alex Seropian, 3x gaming founder behind Bungie, Wideload, and Industrial Toys. From putting Xbox on the map with Halo to focusing on mobile shooters before most thought mobile gamers can be hardcore, Alex has been at the forefront of each PC, console, and mobile wave. In a rare feat, Alex also successfully exited each of those companies to Microsoft, Disney, and EA respectively. Listen in to hear how he built, then evolved each startup to the vastly different cultures at these three large gaming incumbents. Well, welcome to the Gaming Founders Podcast, Alex. It's awesome to have you here. We've known each other for a few years, but it's also been a while since we've last caught up. So excited to hear about everything that's been going on with your latest adventure at Industrial Toys and EA. But maybe before jumping into that, you're founded multiple gaming companies. How did you get into games to begin with?
Oh, first off, Kevin, great to see you. Thanks for having me. It's great to chat with you and Eden today. Well, let's see. My first exposure to video games was back in the 80s when my dad brought home an Atari 2600. In fact, it wasn't actually an Atari 2600. It was the Sears Telegames, which was like the generic knockoff. It was like the rebrand. They took Atari must have done some deal with Sears. I don't know if anybody remembers Sears. It used to be a really big store.
Yes.
And
still Sears in my neighborhood.
Is there? Yeah.
It's like it's just like the logo. Yeah.
Yeah. The one in like where I'm from in Chicago is gone. It's like just an empty lot now. But anyways, he brought home the Sears Telegames. It was the Atari 2600. My neighbor down the block had the Intellivision, which was like the rival unit, to be like, my games are better than yours. No, but the Intellivision had way better games. But I loved the 2600. I still have a box of, I don't know, probably 3 dozen cards. It's like what I spent my, like parents would give me some money to go get lunch or whatever, and I keep the change. That's what I spent all of that change on, was Atari carts. That, and where I grew up was this little town in New York called Ardsley, and it had a really small little downtown, which was about 2 miles from my house. I would walk down to the center of Ardsley to a store called Big Top, which is like a little toy store, and they had 2 stand-up arcade cabinets in there, which would rotate out like every so often. So Defender was in there. I remember Space Invaders being in there, Defender being in there, and a couple other sort of like side-scrolling shooters, like that. And those were really my intro to games. And we would go down to Yonkers to White Plains, to Yonkers to Nathan's Hot Dogs, where they had a huge arcade. And in the late 80s, like when I was in high school, man, Pole Position. Do you remember that game? It was an Atari game too. They had like the they had the sit down cabinet with like the eight seats, and you
Eight
would,
seats?
they were networked. That's it was 4 or 8, but it was a bunch. They were networked, and you would race, AI cars plus, and those were expensive. I think those might have been like $1 per play, but that was so cool, so cool. So that was my exposure to it, and then the first time I ever saw a computer was in 6th grade. Our middle school had Commodore PET computers they were color, right? One color, green. The green phosphorus monitors, all just text. And, the older kids were writing BASIC. And, so I was like, I would read because, it was all just there. I'd read their code. Very intrigued by it.
So you're a self-taught programmer then?
Yeah, that's when I started teaching myself how to code.
How quickly did you make that transition from coding to saying, I want to make games for a living?
Well, let's see. From coding to I want to make games, about like 30 seconds, right? Because that's like I looking at that code on the Commodore PET, and like I saw somebody playing, so like it was like one of those canyon diver games, and it was all ASCII, right? So it's got like 2 walls which are just X's, streaming down the screen, and then you've got like the little thing in the V in the middle that you're trying to avoid the walls. It's like, oh, I could do that, and it started figuring out how to write the code for that. Doing it for a living, I don't know. It's like the other thing that I was really into was like business. So those 2 things, and business, I didn't call it business. I was like, I was going door to door selling popsicles in the summer. When my dad got our first computer at home, it was a Mac. It was this Mac, and we had an image writer, an Apple image writer printer, and you could get a print head for that thing that would print on cloth. So I got that, and I started making T-shirts. And so I would go around handing out little flyers like, "Hey, send me a picture. I'll put it on a T-shirt for you." And that was I loved that kind of thing. When I was in college, I would take my chemistry notes and I would put them in Quark Express on the Mac. I would format them and I would sell them. I was like basically going around saying, "Hey, don't go to class lecture at 7:30 in the morning. It's too early. I'll go. You spy the notes." So those 2 things kind of like that was where my passions intersected. Was, like writing code is like just an incredible way to express and to build, because you can try stuff and iterate so quickly. It's, software is so unforgiving and forgiving that way, and it's such a great creative expression. And then when you do that in the context of a game where it's can be beautiful and it's artistic and it brings together, graphics and sound and this wonderful thing we call gameplay, it really is very satisfying, if you're into it. That's what I found really cool about making games.
That's amazing. So then how did the idea for Bungie come about? Were you working on it was other people, or did you think about co-founders, or you just decided to start making and selling games?
I would say one of the things I really had going for me is I didn't know anything. So it was when you don't know like what's possible, sometimes it empowers you to try things that maybe are, over your skis a little bit. And so when I was in high school, me and my brother were like, let's make a game for this Mac. We're going to make a football game. This was before Madden. And that was when I started learning, how to do user interfaces, graphical user interfaces, and programming in C. This was before C++, really sort of. And that didn't go too far. We did a few things, but it didn't turn to anything. But that was really when in my head, I thought, and we had the name Bungie then. In my head, that was, hey, maybe this is a thing that I might want to do. And then, I went to college and I learned more programming, taught myself more. I took some classes. And when I was getting out of college, I knew I wanted to do something with code. And I went and interviewed at like Morgan Stanley had this really amazing tech program back then where you can get into technical finance, and Arthur Andersen and the consulting companies were sort of like the place to go if you had like a engineering background. And I didn't want to get a job. I didn't want to have a boss. I still don't want to get a job. I still don't want to have a boss. but I thought, hey, I'm going to try making a game and I'm going to try launching it. And the things that I had been playing were, I had a Mac. I've been playing games on the Mac. There weren't a ton, but there was one company that I followed, which was making, they were putting out games. They had a portfolio, and I remember the name of the guy who started it, Daryl Peck, and I can't remember the name of his company, but it was very inspiring to me. The whole idea of doing that the whole thing, like making the game, packaging it, marketing it, putting it in a box. And that was my vision. My naive vision was that I could do all that stuff and get distribution and all of this. And so that was senior year of college. There was no strategy. There was no strategy other than I could put some numbers on a spreadsheet. If I make a game and I could sell this many units, this is what the return could be. And then I just got to work trying to reverse engineer all those challenges of like, how do I make a game like this? Who do I need? I need artists. How do I get distribution? Well, I'm going to call the distributors and ask them. And it was probably luck that I had a Mac, because on the PC side, things were, the companies that were doing that were a lot more mature. And it was much more competitive. Yeah. On the Mac, I could call up Mac Warehouse and they said, you got something, we'll take it. And that's how I got my first orders. And the first couple of games that, they didn't do so much. But, by the time we got to the third one, and I had met Jason by then, Jason was in one of my classes. He was the guy who actually, when the teacher said, you can't run the software on your own computer because you need 8 megabytes of RAM, Jason was the guy who raised his hand. Oh, I got 8 megs of RAM, no problem. And I was like, who's that guy? And so by the time we got to the third game, we were making enough to hire people. And that's when we started thinking about trying to be competitive with not just on the Mac, but with games in general.
Where did the name Bungie come from? It's always been curious. You said you had it in your head.
That's company lore that I'm not able to disclose. There is a story behind it, but I'm not the one who's going to tell it.
Okay. All right. Beer conversation. All right. We got 3 things to talk about over beer now.
I mean, you call Shu Yoshida and ask him, because he paid $3 billion. He should know the secret by now.
Yeah. There you go.
That's right.
You kept the name. Yeah. So then, did you bootstrap Bungie, or did you raise any outside capital or publisher money? Like, what was the environment like?
Basically,
back
bootstrap.
Then?
Check this out, Kevin. This is awesome. I've got a trunk, like a big case in my basement in Chicago that every once in a while I think, I got to open that thing up and like unpack, because it's got all the shit from like founding Bungie, and in there are some VHS tapes. And this is how I bootstrapped the company. My brother-in-law had a company that made commercials, video production. I went over to his studio. I put on a freaking tie and I did a YouTube video, basically. I was like, hey, I'm Alex and I'm a programmer. I made this video game and I'm going to blah, 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 blah. I'm looking to raise some money and I gave it to my dad and said, hey, show this to all your friends. And I think I raised probably $10K.
Wow.
Enough to do one printing run of cardboard boxes. And don't tell anybody, but the diskettes that we stuffed in those boxes came from my summer internship. They're very free and easy with diskette distribution then. So that was fortuitous. And then I wrote a program that would automatically take a load diskettes into the computer, and copy them. And we shrink wrap stuff in my basement. And it was totally bootstrapped.
Wow.
What was the landscape of like games back then? Who were the like main players that you were really interested in thinking about?
Oh, Inline Design. I remembered the name of Daryl Peck's company. It was called Inline Design. They're really sort of a footnote in the gaming industry, but there was a Mac focused game publisher, and that really was my inspiration when we started for like how to set up a publishing company. But this was 1991, and it was really sort of early days in PC gaming. It was like Wolfenstein, I think, was about to come out then. As we were going, our first 3D game was Pathways into Darkness, which was, it was 2.5D, like a 3D walls, basically orthogonal 3D walls with texture mapping on it. And that was around when Wolfenstein had come out. Doom was coming out when we did Marathon. And, Warcraft from Blizzard was coming out when we did Myth. So even though we were on the Mac, we did intersect with our PC counterparts quite a bit. I remember we had long discussions with GT Interactive back in the Doom days about possible acquisition, when we were doing Marathon. And same with, I think it was Sierra then that owned, I think Sierra was the owner of Blizzard back then. And I do remember meeting up with Alan Adam and, one of the Blizzard founders, and Ken and Roberta Williams at Sierra about teaming up, when Myth came out. So it was like, we were doing stuff, I guess, on the Mac side that was happening on the PC side as well. But it was in that, I guess I would call it kind of like that golden era. Command and Conquer, Red Alert, that was coming out in those days, like really influential, pivotal, classic games happening back then.
What was the team size like when you were working on Marathon and into Myth?
Yeah, Marathon was like a really small team. It was probably about 7 folks. And, we had a couple of engineers, a couple of designers. I did all the audio myself. We had we were self-publishing too. So maybe we had about 10. And we made some really rookie mistakes. Like we would go, one of the things, rookie mistakes, I think we did some really cool stuff too. Like we really embraced community. So we would be online to the extent that there was online, but we would go to like the Macworld trade shows, and we would set up a booth and we would bring our early access demo software there, and people would come and play it, and we would take pre-orders, and we would sort of like our own version of early access, except we weren't, we're still not good at estimating, we would tell people, hey, when's it going to be done? Just need a few more weeks, and that went on for way longer than a few more weeks, and that was an early lesson about managing customer expectations, especially in the software business. But those kinds of community building things we always did, and obviously now it's like table stakes. But back then it was a little unique to actually answer the phone or answer an email or show up in person where a fan might be. And I think that really helped pay dividends for us.
How did the idea for Halo come about, and what led you ultimately to joining Microsoft and that becoming kind of the hit it was, obviously, at the launch of Xbox?
Well, we started working on Halo probably, I guess it must have been like 98. We had already done a whole series of Marathon games. We did, if you count the SKUs, we did like 4 or 5. Man, we did a version of Marathon for the Pippin. I don't know if you know what the Pippin was.
No.
But Apple did a deal with Bandai Namco to make a game console called the Pippin.
Oh, wow.
It never released, but Marathon ran on it, crazily enough. But after we had done Myth. Myth 2 was coming out, and we had a studio in San Jose that was working on a game called Oni, which we released with Rockstar. And alongside of that, Jason started up a small team to work on new ideas, which would eventually become Halo. But the idea didn't originate as we know it to be now. It originated as sort of the next gen version of our RTS game. So, Myth was kind of sort of like God View. It had this cool 3D terrain, but the characters were billboards that walked around. And the idea was to really blow out the engine. So everything was 3D. You could do some really cool stuff with the camera. You could do cool stuff with physics. Physics were a big part of the original Myth, and that's how it started. And it started in a new universe, a sci-fi future, universe. And the evolution from there was super iterative. We put features and things into the engine, want to see it closer. I do remember when Charlie, one of the engineers, implemented the suspension on the Warthog, which was on a strategy game map driving around, and you'd really want to see it, so you'd move the camera closer. And we had done a whole bunch of FPS games. And so when we started putting in multiplayer features that getting the camera closer, we just kind of tried it out and pivoted a bit. And then it was a third person shooter. And then it continued to evolve through playtest and iteration to become first person. And that the first time we really took it out to show, it was a very, this was the first time anybody had seen like this. So it was really impactful, really cool demo of starting off in a room, basically in first person running around and seeing the rendering features up close. And then character runs outside into, an environment that looks like Halo, right? With the skies and the water and the trees. And it's like, oh, inside, outside is amazing. And then they get into a vehicle and drive off and head blows.
Wow.
Explodes. But it started as a strategy game.
Fascinating. I had no idea.
I'm thinking about just, are there reflections on your end on, obviously you talked about some of these like legendary games like, Command and Conquer and Warcraft. And I grew up playing those games. And then, Halo was one of the most influential games for me and all my friends. I mean, is there reflection on just like the just crazy impact that you've had on the industry, through this title? It's just, it's crazy to think about now, in retrospect, and me just processing that.
It is crazy. I'm just super lucky to have had the opportunities that I've had and to have met the people that I've met along the way. I'll tell you the thing that continues to surprise me in a really nice way is we'll hire somebody in the studio and they've been working in games and they will come and tell me that their first experience playing games, what made them want to get into this industry, was playing Halo. And that's, I think, the best compliment one could get, and is super flattering. And I think that's really cool. I think you were asking about how did the Microsoft deal come about, and how did that turn into a successful partnership the way it did. There was definitely an element of timing, but I think it's a common phrase, something like there's no such thing as luck. There's just good preparation. And I think we were well prepared for an opportunity like that, where Microsoft was building a console that was kind of based on a PC, and we were just pretty good at making games and content for a PC, and moving it to a console like the Xbox was well within our reach. And they had figured out how to get this project at Microsoft off the ground to build the hardware, and they were very interested and aggressive about getting software, because I think they had figured out, software is what's going to make this thing popular. And our paths intersected at the right points where we were looking for, we had just maybe a year or 18 months ago, we had done an equity distribution deal with Take-Two Interactive, where we raised some production financing out of that and a distribution deal. And we had 3 titles in production. We knew Halo was working, that it was getting the kind of response that we wanted to get. And we knew we needed a big stage, and we needed the support to be able to make it big. And that was a big part of why we did the deal with Microsoft, because it was the biggest stage we could foresee, the launch of a new console, the investment to be a launch title. And, if we showed up with the right software, the sky was the limit. And, it was not nowhere near a sure thing up until we released the game. There were lots of challenges and lots of doubts that we went to E3, maybe E3 is in May, and we came out in, I think, what did we launch in October? So it was like 6 months before launch. We had a horrible showing at E3. I mean, we showed up, the game was running like in the low 20s FPS. We had one map it's like our first map, and it's kind of cool, but there wasn't too much there. And the response was super meh. It's like, did you see Halo at E3? Yeah, I saw it. It was okay. It was kind of chuggy a little bit, That was sort of the response. And we were like, whoa. I think that's right around where we basically took those 3 teams that we had running, and we brought them all together to finish the game. And it's really a testament testimony to the talent leadership that we had in the studio, that the folks who were delivering on their features, on their systems, were able to get them to the finish line at quality. So it was definitely no sure thing, but I think it was a really great opportunity that we were able to execute against, and that's what helped make it so big.
And were you guys kind of left alone to run independently within Microsoft for Halo 1, or were they able to help significantly in getting the game out?
When we were acquired, it was after Microsoft had done a couple of acquisitions before us, and they had made some decisions that they wanted to back away from. For instance, they acquired a company called Faza Interactive. Faza was actually literally down the block from us in Chicago. And when that team joined Microsoft, they didn't leave them intact alone. They sort of integrated them into their existing structure. So the artists there would end up reporting to an art lead, and engineers would report to an engineering lead. So it was interruptive in terms of what their workflow and culture was like. And when we got there, we talked a lot about how we were going to set things up, and there were a couple of things that we did differently, which I think had a lot of impact. One was we kept the team structured the way it was, so there was nobody came in to help us run anything, which was good. The other was that we built out our own space. So when we got there, they didn't have a concept of open work plan. Everybody was in an office. In fact, that was very much part of the culture. It's like every engineer has their own office. They can focus, close the door, get to work. And we operated it in this open environment, which was meant to drive collaboration, meant to expose information so that we could iterate quickly. An engineer could see a designer or an artist implementing something and go, I can make that easier for you. And they could write some code to help improve the pipeline or get visibility into what kind of content was coming up next so that they could be prepared to deliver their part of whatever. All of that stuff is pretty important to our workflow, and setting the studio up the way we did it was not how it would have happened if we didn't raise our hand and say, we should do it this way. And to Microsoft's credit, I think they had taken the approach of, well, what you got must be working pretty well. So, okay, go ahead, do it the way you think it should be done. That said, they did some very good things for us besides letting us, sink or swim. Microsoft's like QA and test and research is excellent, and that was it went beyond just traditional tests. It included the support that we got from that group included things like, build automation and all sorts of things that would help us make our game better, take some of the infrastructure off our hands. And that was, I think that was super productive. Those are the kinds of central services that, when done right, can accelerate, a team.
And then Halo was obviously a huge hit, and then a bunch of sequels were made. I'm curious, maybe for Halo 2, did anything change kind of culturally, or the relationship with Microsoft, now that they've seen you have this huge hit, or were you guys still largely left to kind of run independently?
It was mostly independent, but there was some, when we did the first one, it was to release with the release of the console. So this is the first time that we ever had a deadline, like a hard deadline. Like we'd never done a film game. We'd never, so we really burned to achieve that. Like we canceled 2 projects to put those people on this one thing. We busted, we worked weekends, nights, etc., like to make that happen. And with Halo 2, there was a lot of debate about how much new stuff should we do, how much should this be new levels and content that go into the existing systems. How important is the date? There was a lot of debate about when it needed to be done by, etc. So it was, I don't know the right words for, but just like that part of the relationship was not a foregone conclusion. The first one is like, okay, there's nothing for us to talk about. We know what the objective here is and what the challenges are. We just need to self-solve. And with the second one, there was a little bit more kind of thinking and negotiating around those things, which it added a little bit of stress at the beginning.
How did your role change over time? Obviously, you and Jason were, founders. this is the podcast where we talk a lot about the founder stuff. A lot of times there's drama between founders and roles that are splitting off. Like, what's your mindset as you guys are getting more successful? Is your main focus still game development? Are you hiring and managing? How is that kind of shifting? Where's your head at as you continue to get more successful and grow?
My job changed quite a bit when we got to Microsoft. And Jason was able to remain focused on building the best possible game and software. We were a studio within a publishing organization, and the publishing organization had a lot of the functions that Bungie had as an independent company, the PR, marketing, distribution, finance, HR, all that kind of stuff that we had been managing ourselves, where we were now integrating those things from Microsoft. So a lot of my role shifted from, I would call, entrepreneurial duties, where it's like, okay, there's lots of challenges here to figure out to set up these parts of the business or to scale them, and turn to, well, we have a strategy and we have a goal. I need to manage and marshal the team that I have and the resources that I have around us to achieve those goals. And that's just, it's a different mindset. And I'll tell you, for me, I mean, it ended up being the reason why, not the reason, I came back to Chicago to have a family, but it definitely was part of my psyche, I guess. Like, I identify as that entrepreneur who wants to build the thing. And, a large part of that role was no longer needed. And so for me, it made the success was fantastic. We would meet with the finance team, every month, and it was, the revenue side of the P&L was like way above plan, and we almost just stopped and went to go to lunch before we even looked at the cost side of the P&L. It's just what's the point? Sure. But it was less about building and more about managing. And I think for a founder entrepreneur, sometimes that's a difficult transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. And at some point, you decided to leave Bungie, and I think Jason stuck around, right? What was that? Was it kind of what you just mentioned in terms of just like you've been managing and ready to kind of do something new and get back to the entrepreneurial roots?
Yeah, I sort of felt like I needed a rest. It's like, is the only time in my career that I've ever taken a break. I took 3 months off when I came back to Chicago, and we had our daughter was born, and I was looking for a break. And I was also thinking about my future. I don't know if this is common with entrepreneurs and founders, but I find if I'm doing something where there's a future that's defined, like, hey, this is what you're going to be with the path that you're on, I find it terrifying. Like, I'm an optimist, I'm a dreamer, and I am totally fine looking at a spectrum of results as long as one of them is climbing the mountain with the flag in victory. There's probably 100 other ones laying in a ditch somewhere. That's sort of the journey that I'm interested in. It's like, I would like to try and go do this thing because I think it could be meaningful. I think it could be impactful. I think it will just be really cool. I want to use this thing that I'm going to attempt to build. But to be on a set path that has a set destination, which is sort of in the middle, I'll tell you, that's why I left Disney, because I was in a conference room in a meeting where we were talking about strategy, and I was listening to somebody who had been at the company for 25 years give their opinion. And it was a middle of the road, non-controversial opinion and in that moment I looked and I went, I guess if I'm going to build a career here, that's how I have to do it. And it really scared me off. So I can't remember what, the question was really so when I did, what was sort of it like then when, I honestly, I felt like we had knocked it out of the park. The team was doing great. My role was less about securing the future and figuring everything out. This is a good time to take a break. Let's go start a family, and then we'll tuck into what's next.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like I'm multi-time founder as well, and not nowhere near the success that you've had. But I feel like even for me, I tie so much of my identity to my work, my company, and I see a lot of founders that transition into different roles, whether it be chairman or they're just not involved in their company anymore. Was that hard, sort of separating yourself from the company that you started? And obviously you retired and you were looking for a break, but did you kind of look back and have regret, or was it like, okay, I'm ready for the next thing?
No regret. I mean, I don't know. They just cashed a $3 billion check. That would be cool. But like, I met a lot of my foundational friends in this industry through that whole experience, and I'm still friends with them. And to me, somebody on a couple of occasions, I've heard somebody say either about a thing or to me, like, "Hey, it's business. It's not personal." And it has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, 'cause, I mean, I understand like, oh, we have to think about the greater good of this whole organization more than an individual. I understand that. But like the idea that this business we're in, making video games, is anything but personal is, I don't know. I don't agree with it, because like you walk into a game studio, that's all that is there are people, and the creative and the cool stuff that comes out of it is all based on those relationships. So I sort of feel like this business is entirely personal. So yeah, I love the journey that I've taken. It's afforded me the opportunity to have a family and to have a personal identity that's not a company. And yeah, so it's been really interesting. Like I said, I've been very lucky to have gotten opportunities to do various things. The time I spent at Disney was a huge learning experience. What a great company!
I was going to ask you about that.
So
actually,
much interesting stuff.
Yeah, what was Disney has sort of gotten deep into games, out of games, deep into games. I mean, they've done sort of back and forth multiple times. So during the era when you were with Wideload and you joined Disney, sold it to what was that time like at Disney, and what were you guys working towards?
Disney is a very fascinating company. It's amazing. Like after I was there for just a few months, I reflected on the fact that like at Microsoft, we were this game team, right? And if you look around at all the other business units, all the other teams, there is definitely a lot of excellence at Microsoft. But at the time it was, oh, okay, there's the Excel team over there and a Windows team over here. Like when you're at Disney and you look around, that there's excellence everywhere. And it's like, oh, there's Pixar. Huh. Oh, there's the guys that made Phineas and Ferb. Huh. Oh, look, there's Disney World. Like everything is top of its game in entertainment. And it's super inspiring. Like just going up to Pixar and see how they do stuff. It's like incredibly inspiring. But when I got there, it was at the height of Disney's investment of building a vertical gaming enterprise. Where they had multiple studios. There were 750 folks in the org. It had been doing well, and it was trying to scale to sort of own be a whole vertically integrated publisher. And, the role that I came in was basically chief creative. And I was a kid in a candy store, man. I had an office up on the loft overlooking the whole operation. And I had the keys to the vault. I was spinning up, I had a Space Mountain game I was trying to sign with Gearbox. I had signed Iron Man with Avalanche Studios, the guys that did Just Cause. It was just Black Widow with Platinum Games. It's like, come on, are you kidding me, right? This is amazing. And I think the challenge for Disney getting into games that way is that it's hard. I mean, and it's expensive. And above where the games business ended, which at the time, Graham Hopper, there was no muscle memory, no scars, no wins in the game business. So the idea that something could take, 3 or 4 years, or you might have to chase a $25 million investment with another 20 to get to great, was not really it wasn't a thing. So in terms of sort of executive sponsorship and confidence to sort of really execute on that scale, it was a challenge, and maybe not all the teams were capable of getting there as well. So when I got there, it was like, it was the day they announced the Marvel acquisition. It was literally like anything is possible. And then a lot of things started to change. Free to play had just started coming, and mobile just started, happening. Some of the larger bets that Disney had placed in the years prior, were taking longer to come to fruition, etc. And ultimately, it was sort of like a two-step pivot of trying to transition into like Facebook and lower cost games that were free to play, and then eventually falling back on the licensing business, which is where they are today. And there's really, really good stuff coming out right now. It's just being done on a different model. Will they come back around? Will they come back to it? I don't know. Maybe the unlock for them is looking at games as a generative source of IP, like they look at some of the other media that they fund. And currently, it's really more of a place to exploit existing IP, which is smart. And I think doing it on the licensing model that they're doing now is also pretty smart for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've always contemplated the parks business, which is extremely high capital kind of intensity, the cruise business as being like supportive to their IP. And video games had, I guess, like massive capital investment, but no ongoing benefit long term. Whereas like now, as they're shipped more as a service, the thinking to me would be like, how is this different than just like large build outs of theme parks that can benefit an IP?
I would be surprised if they didn't invest in some sort of multi-property metaverse of their own kind of thing.
At some point, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So after Disney, it sounded like you left and made the transition over to mobile. What was the sort of inspiration for industrial toys?
When I was at Disney, we were looking very intently at mobile, and it was very clear in the early days, just the trajectory that the platform was going on was crazy. And even I've looked back at my pitch decks from when we did our A round, and it's like our projections, which at the time we thought, oh, these are a little aggressive, were like really conservative when you look in the rearview mirror, right? But like just looking at what was working on the platform back then, and I guess this was 2012, maybe 2012, 2013, something like that. Looking, this was pre-Supercell, right? They're like looking at what was working on the platform, the kind of investment needed to stand something up, and what segments or players or genres were just not being served at all. That was really the inspiration, the strategy around starting the company, which you could maybe simply say, hey, me, Alex, I'm old. I'm not playing my console anymore. I got this iPad, and where are the games for me?
Right.
And so, two and two together, this platform is huge. It's global. The cost of entry is pretty low. Nobody's addressing the core gamer. We sort of know how to do that. So that's what we're going to do. And I think it took a little longer for the market to catch up with that thesis than maybe we would have thought, but it's totally there now.
It seems like mobile's oftentimes in the games industry, what I've learned is like there's like the PC console world, and then there's the mobile world, and a lot of times those worlds don't, those people don't talk with each other, and there's sort of like some wall that separates the two. In many cases, I mean, in some cases there's that divide, but you went from sort of this like whatever AAA PC console world, and decided to make the core gamer transition, which I think we're definitely starting to see more of that. That's pretty interesting in that the core market, to your point, was still underserved for a while.
Yeah. I think we'll continue to see that happen, especially as this generation of gamers that grew up in the last, 10, 15 years, continue to play games. The attach rate for any gamer and a mobile device is 1-to-1. Everybody has a mobile device, and everybody still likes games. I think probably the biggest hurdle for adoption for a AAA gamer has been getting into a free-to-play gaming environment, and that has become super popular, not just on mobile, but on PC and more and more on console as well. So some of those walls, I think, are definitely eroding.
Yeah. I mean, like I love the Marble Snap stuff because it was like many times I've felt as a core gamer playing mobile games that the monetization tactics were just not attractive for me. Marble Snap felt like they were doing the right thing by players from a monetization standpoint. The core loop was satisfying and the controls were native to a mobile device. Those few elements combined in one like game was more unique than I guess what I've seen. I think I agree. I think we'll see that more. Obviously, mobile's been going through lots of shifts and challenges. Can you speak to kind of, obviously you've been doing mobile development at Industrial Toys, and then there's announcements and things going on. Like, what's your view of sort of the mobile industry?
Loaded question for me. I think that the mobile game business continues to evolve. On the one side, it is a fantastic ecosystem. There's a lot of gamers, a lot of people that want to play on mobile, and the kinds of games that are appealing to that audience they're varied. So there's just a lot of opportunity for doing something interesting and appealing to a really large audience. It's just gotten challenging to operate within that ecosystem because it's gotten very competitive. There continues to be a lot of titles that come out, but more so they're getting better and better, which is great for the consumer. But it's raised the cost of entry for developers quite a bit. And at the same time, with the IDFA rules and the privacy stuff that's been happening at Apple and now Google, it's just gotten more expensive to capture the right players into your ecosystem. So it has put pressure from a couple different directions on publishers wanting to do big, impactful things. It's more competitive and more expensive. The competition usually extends timelines. The cost to market is 2 or 3, or in some case, depending on the genre, it could be 7 or 8 times as expensive as it used to be to target players with a high lifetime value. And so it has forced companies like I obviously Electronic Arts has done quite a bit of thinking about how they want to approach this market, and ultimately is pulling back from the standalone big budget AAA mobile game. So it's definitely changed a bit, and you also have new things happening too, like Apple Arcade, which isn't like quite exactly new right now, but is a new kind of ecosystem that's less about incentivizing daily behavior and generating these high LTVs as it is about producing high quality content that players want to be in that experience every month. So there's on the one hand there continue to be lots of really interesting opportunities, and the other hand there's some things have gotten a lot more challenging.
I mean, I'm curious. I mean, you obviously Halo was revolutionary for console and kind of reinvented the shooting genre on console that people have always thought before that would have been tough to do coming from keyboard and mice setup. And I know when you did Industrial Toys, that was certainly a time point when people thought, oh, why would players want to play a shooter on mobile? Do you feel like that shooter opportunity has that sort of finally been kind of explored and now accepted by mobile players, or do you feel like there's still that gap, but there's still an opportunity to try to build a sort of defining shooter or quote unquote original shooter on mobile that might get the same respect that a Halo got, on console and obviously the Dooms and the Quakes of the world on PC?
It's a good question, Kevin. I mean, it was part of our original thesis that, hey, we're going to build an FPS game that is really built for device. To complete that gameplay loop, that 30 seconds of fun that everybody's used to, regardless of what platform they're playing on, but on a mobile phone. And we did try lots of different input schemes and systems. We did a few games that had very novel approaches. And at the end of the day, those didn't work. And what has been working is porting the dual joysticks to the touchscreen interface. Now, obviously, 10 years ago, if you asked me, I would have said, no, that's never going to work. You really have to build a bespoke, control scheme. But the market has spoken, and that is what is working right now. And those games are huge. COD Mobile, PUBG, Free Fire. I'm sure there's more that's going to be coming out that will be in that same sort of size. But is there something new and novel that will set a new standard on mobile for FPS? Maybe. But I'm not the one who's going to go after that. I think if I'm thinking about what I want to do next right now, and a mobile publisher or mobile developer is not on the list. That's not to discourage anybody from getting into it.
Right.
But
well, certainly if EA couldn't cut it, that's a great call for entrepreneurs to go ahead and do it. Very cool. And maybe one more question before kind of our cornerstone question. You talked a bit about Microsoft and Disney and kind of how those two cultures were quite different, but excellent in their own ways. How was it like working at EA? How was that different? Or, love to hear a bit about what that latest adventure was like as well.
EA, I think maybe, 10, 15 years ago had a pretty bad rap. There was that whole EA spouse controversy, and was not really a company that developers looked at as being a great place to go and spend their career. And EA was one of the companies that I had never worked with until we did the deal with them about 4 years ago. And I'll say that I've been impressed and surprised. Maybe surprised, maybe too hard of a word, but I would say the management team that's at the company right now, I think really cares about players, cares about the product they're making, cares about the people that are making them. They're good people. That should be a given, but I think in the history of the video game business, maybe it's not. And so worth saying. I would also say that EA has a very contrasting difference with where other large companies I've been at, like Disney and Microsoft, and Microsoft's probably this way now, but they certainly weren't when I was there. That EA is very much a video game business. I mean, it's their core focus. They've been doing it for, I think, 40 years. So, where Disney didn't necessarily have the experience to know which kind of pain was good pain, where to re-up and reinvest to get to greatness, etc. I think EA has a lot more of that experience and is and has the vocabulary, etc. That it feels a lot more like a video game business than some of the other large companies that are maybe getting into the space, etc. And there is a lot of history there that is inspiring with all the games. And that's not to say that EA doesn't have its challenges. It's got plenty of challenges. It's a very interesting company in the fact that it's kind of it's a confederation of studios. There's not one culture that pervades development. Every studio has their own culture. Every studio has their own processes. Not everybody uses the same tech, the same engine, the same repository, the same build systems. Those are all fairly bespoke to the teams. That's interesting. I found that actually to be quite surprising. Powerful in some ways that the teams can really stand up and own, what they're doing. And maybe leaves a little on the table that some of that stuff really should be centralized and optimized for teams to use, but different,
We always like to ask this question at the end. If you could go back to the founding of any of your companies and kind of give yourself one key piece of advice, what would that be?
I probably would go back to myself at every one of them and say, go fast. I firmly believe that business is about making the best of what you got. And it's very rare that you have easy decisions to make. And if you have easy decisions to make, good for you. And who cares? You don't remember them, right? The things you remember and the things you fret about are the hard calls. You've got two people that can't work together and you got to figure out how to solve it. And the only solution is for one of them to go. It's like, well, okay, well, what the heck am I going to do? Go fast means, hey, your job isn't to make the perfect decision. It's to make the best bad decision. It's like, what is the best option here? And sometimes if you take too long doing that, it's like nothing else stops. And going fast just means, sometimes you got to take your emotion off the table and figure out how to do the right thing and just do it.
Actually, I want to ask a follow-up to that. Then was there anything you did differently kind of the second or third time around that did help you go faster and sort of make decisions faster?
Yeah, I think that the hardest decisions are always the ones that involve people and personalities. So if somebody maybe isn't able to scale to where you were hoping, and you put them in a position, in the past, maybe that would have festered too long and long enough where that person would have to exit. And the thing that I've learned is that it is definitely worthwhile to invest in people. And if somebody has outpaced their scale, there's a different role for sure, but that's something that you can do. And you could do that with, I guess the word is kindness, in a way that's like, hey, we're all in this team together. This, what I really need out of this role is this. And, why don't you come and do this because you're really good at it. And we're going to go find somebody who's done this other thing before. And it's all in the service of making the best thing, or making this company as good as it can be. And that's just maturity. When you're young, it's really hard to have conversations like that. And, maybe after you've had them a few times, it doesn't get easy, but sort of understand the importance of doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there is I don't know, maybe it's through kind of the press and all that. There is a bit of a myth about kind of the team that makes it from the beginning all the way to the end and has an incredible exit. And it's kind of everyone's the, OG on the team, and that's all gone well. But I think if you look at most examples of companies, there's so much change that happens. And a lot of that comes with, almost with some foresight, try to figure out what kind of team, what kind of changes need to be made so that we can be ready for the next, not just 6 months or 12 months, but for the next few years. And it's a constant thing that the really good founders, they're always thinking about that, including for themselves.
I think that's a good point.
And what they can best do.
Yes, exactly. It's like it took me a long time to figure out what I liked and what I was good at intersected. And even stuff that I liked that I was like, I'm not the best at this. Yeah. I need help with that. That's not easy either. So figuring that stuff out, I think, is pretty important. I probably would have gone back and told myself to hire a good COO sooner than I did, and etc.
Well, Alex, we've already gone over. Thank you so much for taking this extra time with us. It's really a pleasure getting to know a bit about all the history and all the work that you've done in your incredible career.
Oh, right on. Thank you. Very, very flattering. Thank you for all the nice things that you guys have said, and a real pleasure to chat today.